Okay, so now we are ready to begin UV editing, right? These, when we're doing this, we're doing something that's called UV unwrap, and UV weld are terms we're going to use a lot, and UV relax. What that means is basically you can imagine this model as a three-dimensional, right, as paper that's been folded up into 3 dimensions, and we need to cut it and be able to lay it flat. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be figuring out what edges do we need to cut on to make this lay flat and make the lines and edges smooth and square, so that then we can make sure that we get this grid and everything to be proportional the way it should be, so that our materials look right. If you imagine we had the name of the camera or some other details on this surface, right now anything we put on the front surface would show up on the side, the top, everywhere else, right? It would be stretched around here. There's all sorts of problems with how these materials are applied as they are. So let's go ahead and get started. And to do that, we are going to go to our layouts, and we are going to go to BP UV Edit. Now, once we do that, we are going to want to select all of our objects. Once we select all of our objects, so once we're in this mode, we'll notice that things look a little different. So first, let's introduce the interface a touch. So this window over here is called our Texture UV Editor. You may notice that the 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0, and 1, 1 are here. Those are also posted in the corners of each of these textures over here. And right, so that means that you can see how distorted this rectangle or the square is getting across the surface, and how smushed it is over here. And what we want is we want all of these different faces to fit on here and be proportionally accurate to the grid that we're using. And so that's what UV unwrapping helps us do. And then we can actually use part of this, what's called a tile. We can have our different materials, we can have different images and paint on them and do whatever we need to, and know we're only hitting the spot that we need to hit. So that's what that is. In the middle are a lot of the UV commands. The whole menu is split out here. Down below are a bunch of UV tools, and we'll talk about what some of these do here soon. And then we have our standard coordinates menu. This is a very interesting and new way of looking at materials, which we're going to talk more about when we get into body paint. And then we have our standard attributes and object manager here. So let's go ahead and get going. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we have UVs. If I click on any of these objects, you'll see that I have UVs there. Now you'll also notice that I have these bright green outlines and your colors might be different. To fix that, we can just go to Edit and Preferences, or you can go to the Cinema4D menu and Preferences. It gets you to the same place. And then what we want to do is we want to go down to Scheme Colors, open that up, go to Texture UV Editor Colors, and the very last option, or one of the very last options, is this UV Seams color. And that's what we want to adjust. And so I set mine to this beautiful green, but anything that makes it really easy to see where your seams are is useful. And you can see that there are seams. This is places where where these cuts have been made by Cinema4D, right? And so you can see on this this side face, there's a seam right around here, and then there's seams around there, there's seams everywhere, right? And we don't want the default ones because that's not really helpful for how we're doing this. So let's go ahead and select all of our objects now in our hierarchy. We want to go and we want to make sure that we're in polygons mode, and we want to hit Command or Control A to select all of our polygons. Once we've done that, what we want to do is we want to come down here to these menus of options. We want to go to Projection, and we're going to click on Frontal. And it's going to do the same thing it did last time. And then we're going to select each of our objects, and we are going to click frontal as the projection type. So I've got my lens body. Let's see here. I've got my button. I've got my other button. My lens, and this flash one, I don't know what I did with that. I think I deleted some geometry that I shouldn't have, but we're just going to forget about it for now because we don't really need it, and we're going to go to frontal for this as well. Now what this does when we do all of these adjustments is that it welds all of these things together. Notice that the only seams I have now are where the holes are in the mesh, right? And that's what we want, right? Before there were seams everywhere, right? This had seams cut out in all sorts of different locations, as did, the button still has two seams, and it had those two seams when I worked on it before, and it hasn't changed, and I'm just going to leave it as it is. This square button has, one seam. If I zoom in on that, you can kind of see that. So now there's some other issues here, right? One of the things is now you can see, because I did a frontal projection, right, this is really, really warped. But it gives us a good place to start. So let's go ahead and start with something that's simple to unwrap. And that is going to be this button. Now, before we do that, one of the other ways we want to work is we want to turn on solo mode. And what solo mode does is it allows you to hide everything that you're not working on, right? So when I go to work on the button, all I see is the button. When I go to work on the lens body, all I see is the lens body, right? This is really handy. The other things that I want to do is I want to go to my filter menu in my viewport, and I just want to go to geometry only. That gets rid of everything else, and I just have gray space around the object, which makes it a lot easier to see what I'm doing. The other thing I can do is if I change my display to hidden line, that can be really helpful too, right? It gets rid of the material. It makes it much easier to see these. If I change to, say, lines, then it's more confusing because I can see the back of the object too. Whereas hidden line just lets me see the front of the object. Something else to note, your UVs are aligned correctly, right? If there's blue on the inside and orange on the outside. The same goes here, right? You want this to be facing the correct direction. Okay. So let's get started, and we should start with something simple. So I was going to do the button, right? So now I've got this button, and what I want to do to get started with this process, and this is something you will always do to start this process, is to click, well, not always, but most of the time, is to click the UV Unwrap button. As soon as I do that, I actually have a really pretty good result, right? This button is super simple. What it's done is it's unfolded everything and made it straight. Now, the only issues are there is going to be some distortion here in these corners, right? The square face is going to be nice and true, but if I zoom in on my view here on this thing and I rotate my view a little bit and I go to display and do Garage shading, when I come down here, you'll see that the lines here warp. Right? Instead of going straight down like they should, this line should come straight down here, they're warped. And that's because of the way that this shape is being deformed as we unfold it, right? You can imagine trying to unfold something rounded and what that would look like. And so in order to get it to work, we're going to need to cut some edges to do this. And so I'm going to go ahead and switch to edges mode. And I can either use the live selection tool or what is sometimes simpler to do is to actually just use the move tool, because then I just hover over the line and click and I don't have that area of impact. And I just want to go ahead and say, and choose some lines to cut. And so what I'm going to do, and you'll kind of see the logic of this as it goes, is I'm going to cut right along here. And so this edge is going to pop out, and this edge should straighten up as well. And when I do that, I can go ahead and click UV Unwrap again. Actually, no, sorry. I can go to Relax UV at the bottom. and I can, I want to make sure that I check mark cut selected edges and hit apply. And when I do that, I've split this one cut, right? And now things are looking a little funny, right? It's not oriented correctly anymore, but this edge is very straight. So I'm going to go ahead and hold down Shift, and it's important that we keep the other edges we've already selected when we do these next ones. So I'm going to hold down Shift. I'm just going to come down here, hit apply again. Right, so now I've got these two edges cut off the main body of the object. And so now I can come down and I'm going to do the same edges on the other side, right? It's important to get, in order to make this nice and even, I can go ahead and do this again. So I'm going to go ahead and select those. I'm going to hit apply, which should cut that one. And I'm going to come down to this bottom edge. I'm going to hold down Shift. Cut this, and apply. And now that I've got this set, I should be able to hit apply a few more times. And each time it's going to make some adjustments to it. But it's still at this angle, right? And these, the edges here are still a little bit problematic, right? They're not exactly bending the way I'd want them to. So sometimes you might try and apply this ABF, which is a slightly different algorithm. And sometimes that can make a difference as well. Now, the next step I can apply made all of my work go away. Right, so I don't want to weld anything yet, but what I do want to do is I want to rotate this so it's at least straight to begin with, and then we'll talk about welding. So, the way I rotate this is I use this tool up here that's the UV transform. I can use my other transform tools too, but this is nice because it allows you to do scaling and everything else if you want to. And one of the tricks to getting this edge to be straight is to go zoom in enough and move your viewport around so that you can use the edge of the window as a straight edge. Right, so now that I'm here, I can come here and I can say, that looks pretty good. Right? I don't know what just happened though. I'm going to go to polygons mode, make sure that's all selected. So what happened is I want to make sure that I do this rotation in polygons mode. Otherwise, all I did was rotate the seams of the object and the edges that I had selected. Right? So I'm going to say that one more time. I'm going to mess it up one more time just to make sure you know. Right? So if I am in edges mode, I have those edges selected and I rotate this, right? You'll see that it's actually bending the mesh and doing terrible things. Right? So what I need to do before I do this rotation is go back to polygons mode and rotate this. Now, this is one of the things that I would say is most frustrating about UV editing, is making sure that you're in the right modeling mode for things to work the way you want them to. So this is pretty good. I'm going to rotate it just a touch more, maybe, if I'm lucky. Right? And there's also a level where you can just be, you can just say, you know what, I'm happy with the way it is. It's close enough. And so you can see here we have this edge coming down here, but we have this thing that's tucked under and hidden. Now, this object's so small, we could just leave it like this. And, you know, this edge is still not as straight as we'd like it to be. But again, these are really fine details. So, but I want to show you how you can now weld this back together and clean these corners up a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my live selection tool. And I just want to select these polygons that are on this edge. And then I'm going to go ahead and click UV Weld. And what that does is on one of these corners, I wish it was this one. Let's see which one I actually... Let's go ahead and I'm going to do this on one of these other corners and see if this is indeed the one that I want. I don't see those. Let's see if I can just find them here. Here we go. This is the one that I want to do, so you can see what's happening. So I'm going to hold down Shift. I've selected these, and if I just have these polygons selected, then I go to UV Weld, then it will weld them to the adjacent polygons. And you can see it's pulled this edge over. It's not perfect, it's a little deformed, but it's pretty close. And so what I'm going to do is, now it'd be nice if all of these polygons were uniform in size. And so what I can do is I can hold down Shift, I can select all of these polygons, and I can come down here to Relax UV. I can uncheck Cut Selected Edges. I can be in ABF mode, and I can check mark Pin to Neighbors. And what that does is it means that anywhere where it's connected to a set of polygons that are not selected, it's going to hold that position, and it's just going to make manipulations inside here. So if I do that, then it's going to make this nice rounded corner. And yeah, there's still a little bit of distortion, but again, it's much better than it was. And I could probably come back to Edges mode, and if I really wanted to clean this up, I could come in here, I could select this edge, and I could go to, I could click on UV Unwrap and uncheck Pin to Neighbors, make sure nothing's set, right? And I could come in and try and fix that, right? But no matter what, with this corner, I'm going to have one edge that's a little bit wonky. So I'm not going to go ahead and do that. I'm just going to continue on down the line. I could also manually manipulate those lines. But again, that's not worth my time. So I'm going to go back to Polygons mode. I'm going to select all of these polygons. I'm going to click UV Weld. I'm going to select all the polygons that make up the corner. I'm going to check mark Pin Border Points. I'm going to click Apply. And that made a little bit of a thing. It's still oddly not as much as I would have expected, which is really bizarre. I don't know why that point didn't move. But this corner point really did not want to go anywhere. Maybe if I select a couple of these and just move that point over a bit further and move these all over a bit. So you can go in here and manually manipulate things too, if for some reason, right, things aren't working the way that you wanted them to. And once I've done that, I could go back to Polygons mode, and I could click Apply, and I'd get a better result. Again, I could manually make sure these are square, so I could always go to Points mode, come down here, and actually, right, try and make these a little bit less. And then go back to this and just hit Apply, right? And that'll clean it up a little bit more. And so if I rotate my model around to see the corner that I currently have selected, it will probably look, right, significantly better in terms of distortion. Now there's still going to be some distortion down here, but again, there's only so much you can do. So let's go ahead and do this corner. I'm not, because I'm being lazy. Ooh, I don't know what I just did there, but I need to use my live selection tool, select these, and go to Weld, and then select all of these polygons, and go to Apply here. And again, for some reason, there's something's going on with this a little bit. I don't know quite what, but oh, because I have the wrong setting on. It should be Pinned to Neighbors. There we go. That's what I wanted to have happen. Okay, so I could go back and fix these that I made the mistakes on, where I actually clicked the wrong checkbox. I think I even said Pinned to Neighbors, but ended up doing Pinned to Border Points. So I'm going to apply that. That fixes that some. And I could do the same thing to this corner now if I wanted to fix that up a little bit. If I select, right, just deselect any I don't want, apply. Okay. That's a lot better than it was. And now this corner looks really great, right? Things are a little bit weird there, but that's to be expected. Okay, now that I have done that, I'm done with this one. So what I want to do is I want to double click on it. And I could either manually pack this, or I could do the packing algorithm. And what that means is that when you have a bunch of islands on an object, it will take them, and make sure they're all on this square. And so I'm going to go ahead and go to UV packing. I want to make sure that it's set to geometric, and that I have, in this case, I'm going to say, sure, preserve orientation and equalize island side. I'm going to hit apply. It's going to take it a second, and it'll basically shrink it down so it fits within that tile. Okay, and this object is done. Now that this object is done, something I can do is I have this all selected. I'm going to go to select at the top of the screen. I'm going to click hide selected. And what that does is it disappears the object from the hierarchy until I'm ready to use it again. So let's go ahead and do something a little bit different. We're going to do this round button. And so with this round button, let's go ahead and find it in our view. So I'm going to click in the viewport. I'm going to hit the letter S so I can see it, and I'm going to rotate it. Now, this object is closed, right? So UV unwrapping is really tricky when you have a closed object, right? This is called watertight is another term, right? So the previous object, that button, was open on the backside, whereas this one is completely closed. So I left this closed just so we could talk about closed objects. And so what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to figure out where we want this to open up. And honestly, there's already seams here. And so this object may be in a good spot to be cut. It's already got these seams where it's going to want to be cut. So let's go ahead and just click on UV unwrap and see what happens. Let's move on to the round button. If the geometry is not selected already, please go ahead and select it. And you'll see that there's already a couple seams in it. And those are just generated by the way that Cinema4D does this. And so let's go ahead and unwrap it and see what happens. So some crazy things happen. So first, the top and bottom circles and some of these edges where those green edges stop, those worked really, really well, right? Those are nice, efficient spaces. The only thing that we might want to do with these two shapes is to run an ABF relax on them. So I'm going to deselect everything. I'm going to double click on select this one. I'm going to go to relax UV. I'm going to make sure to check mark pin border points, right? Which means that this outside ring is not going to change. It's just going to move things around in here. I'm going to hit apply. I don't see a whole lot of a change in there, but it did relax it some, and it probably made those more proportionally accurate. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same exact thing with the other one. And then I'm going to uncheck in border points. I'm going to hold down Shift, double click, select this one. I'm going to hit the letter E. And I'm just going to move these up out of the way, and I'm going to go to select and hide selected. Right, so now I've got this last piece left. Now, if I double click on it to select it, I can move it wherever. But you'll notice, right, there's going to be a lot of distortion, especially in these polygons here. They should all, right, more or less be the same dimensions. They shouldn't look anything like this. And so how are we going to resolve this process? The other thing is that this is a loop, and we need to cut that loop apart. And so the first thing we should do is choose any one of these edges, but I'm going to have to switch to my edges mode. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to come back. I'm going to select all, so all my polygons are selected. Then I'm going to go to edges mode, and I'm going to double click on any old edge. This one will work. These corner ones would work. It doesn't really matter. And so I'm going to go ahead and go back to polygons mode, and I'm going to click on UV unwrap. And, oh, oops. I'm going to click on UV unwrap, but and I could actually click on that a couple times. No matter what, it's not going to get too much better. But what I need to remember to do is to check mark cut selected edges and then hit apply. Now, when I do that, this is much better, right? I've basically cut the strip so it's flat, and there's going to be a seam somewhere. But the other issue is that it's not straight. And that's because these edges curl around. Now, I know from stopping this video twice and trying to figure out what was going wrong, there's this tiny, tiny ring of polygons around this top side that's giving me a lot of trouble. Because what we're going to do is we're actually going to cut down into until this goes straight, right? So this curl up here and the curl below, we are going to cut all those edges so that it'll lay flat. And before, I wasn't cutting that one, and I couldn't figure out why one side was opening and the other wasn't. So if something strange like that happens, you know why. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my Edges tool, and I'm going to go ahead and hit the letter U on the keyboard, and then the letter B, which selects the ring selection. And I'm going to do some of this selecting in this view, some of the selecting in this view, right? What I want to do is I want to come down here. I definitely want to select this. So you can, and I'm holding down Shift while I do this so that this cut continues to be made here. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this one, and that's all I need on the top, except for this tiny, tiny, tiny one. And I zoomed in as far as I could, and I could not select it in this view. So I ended up going into this view and trying to select it there. And I was able to click on it when I zoomed way in and get it. It's really annoying trying not to model things that don't have little edges like that. And then we need to go to the bottom, and it might actually it might be really helpful for us to be able to see where we're at on this bottom side as we select these. So I'm going to pull this down a little bit, and I'm going to start here. I'm going to hold down Shift, and hold down Shift, and hold down Shift, and that should do it. And there's these 4 that are all aligned vertically. Once I've done that, now I can go to UV Unwrap again, or I can click on this Apply here. And now, look what happens, right? So I've got this, granted it's at a 45-degree angle, more or less to the plane, but I've got this nice long strip of flat, uniform polygons. And so what I can do is I can go ahead and rotate this some degrees. So I'm going to go to Polygons mode first. I'm going to grab this, and it really does look like it's at 45 degrees. So I bet if I hold down Shift, click and drag so it snaps, and I can snap it to 45, and then I can just move my view over and see if that lines up. It's really close. It's not quite there, so I'm just going to adjust it a few tenths of a degree, and I am pretty happy with that. Okay, so now there's a couple things I could do. I could either leave the cuts there, right, or I could come in here and select all these polygons and try and weld this all together into a uniform strip. It's up to you what you do. I'm going to leave it the way it is because I don't want to take that time. And now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and go to Select and Unhide All. And once I've unhidden all, I want to make sure none of these polygons are selected. I'm going to go to UV Packing, and I'm going to leave Preserve Orientation because it doesn't really matter which direction this goes. We're going to have issues no matter what. I'm going to leave Equalize Island Sign on in this, and Geometric. I'm going to hit Apply. And when I do that, it should pack it all down into a corner. And I am done with this object. So let's go on to our next object. Let's go to the lens. So the lens is similar in that, right, it also has 2 surfaces. I'm going to select this, oops, I'm going to hit S. Right, so it also has 2 surfaces. Now, something I'm noticing in this version is that this is all the inside surface, and I want to fix that. And I could either fix it now or later, and I'm going to go ahead and fix it now. So I'm going to hit the letter U for selection. I'm going to hit the letter L for loop, and I'm going to take my filter off so I can actually see the tool real quick. I'm going to select this, and then I could either try and do more loop selections, or I could hit the letter U and then do a fill selection, which is the letter F, and just hover over this, hold down Shift and click. And so now I've got those selected, so I'm just going to go up to my mesh at the top of the screen, and I'm going to go down to normals and reverse normals, and I'm just going to hit OK. Right, and so now if I select all again, right, all those normals are oriented the correct direction for this object to work. And so this is an object that has no seams, but it is watertight. And so in this case, I get to choose where this seam is at. And I could either do it, I want the front surface to have the least amount of distortion. And so it's sort of a question whether I want to cut it on this outer edge or this inner edge, but it's one of those two that I want to do. And so I'm going to hit the letter U and the letter L to get my loop selection tool. I'm going to switch to edges mode, and I'm going to select this edge. And when I do that, if I just go to UV unwrap and make sure that I have nothing selected here, and just go to UV unwrap, right? It's going to do something similar, right? It's going to make a choice as to where to unwrap this, right? The other thing I can do is if I want to have more choice as to how this unwraps, I can just select half the polygons and unwrap them one piece at a time. Or I can, check mark cut selected edges and hit apply, right? And that would do something a little different. It's laid everything on top of itself. And you can see that it's not quite as even as the other one was. But let's go ahead and I just want to see what that looks like. If I go ahead and for some reason, loop doesn't let you double click to select it all. I don't know why. But yeah, so basically, in this case, I was able to control where that's at. But when I did it this way, I didn't get as clean of islands, right? These are kind of warped and everything. If I uncheck cut selected edges and hit apply with LSCM, right, I'm actually getting more distortion. If I go to ABF, ABF actually flattens it out a little bit more and makes it even. I tend to prefer that. Something else, with this style of projection and with this being a round lens, is that there is some distortion on this, on these polygons. And so the question is going to be, are you happy with that distortion or not? If it's just going to be a lens with nothing on it, it doesn't really matter. We're not going to notice the distortion across that surface because of the way the shader works that deals with that. If I want to fix this, though, I can always go to U and then B to ring select, and I can go to edges. I can ring select some of these edges, and I can start to, cut selected edges. I might switch to LSCM just to see, right? And this is, not necessarily helping any. And so, the question is, what's the best way to unwrap this, right? In my case, I think if I step all the way back, let's see how far I can go back. And I come in here and I go to polygons, I have it all selected, and I just say UV unwrap. Oops. Oh, right, so there's no seams or edges, right? Because I went so far back that I got rid of that edge that I selected. And so I have no seams or edges, so I need to create one. So I'm going to hit the letter U and then L for loop selection. I'm going to go to this edge, and I'm going to choose to select this outer edge. And now I'm going to go ahead and click UV unwrap. And there we go, right? There's some distortion. I could try and cut this up, a little bit better, much like you would cut a sphere to make it lay flat. But for this object, it doesn't really matter. So all I want to do at this point is make sure I have all my polygons deselected. I'm going to go to UV packing, and I just want to hit apply. And now something else, right? These are both rotated a little bit, so they're not going to be square to the grid. So I could either come here and turn my texture on and say UV map, and then select an island. I'm going to use the letter E, and then rotate this island a few degrees until that edge lines up with that grid, more or less. And then I could come down to this other island, double click, and this one requires significantly more rotation, but again, I can get this to align, more or less. Okay. Now I've done this. If I go back to my display and do garage shading, you'll see that there is warping on the surface. And this is actually upside down, which means that what I may want to do is select this, and if I go to here and say mirror U and mirror V, then it should be the right orientation. That is something to be careful of, is to make sure it's oriented the way that you want it to be oriented. Oh, actually it was right side up. I was just upside down in the world. So yeah, but if you do have it apply in a strange direction, you just have to flip it around a couple times to fix it. Okay, so now that that's set, I'm going to go ahead and make this an empty canvas again, and I'm going to move to the next object. So let's go to our flash and hit the letter S on the keyboard, or H. And oh, this flash 1 doesn't exist, so I'm going to delete that. I'm going to select the lens body at this point, and I'm going to hit the letter H to frame this. So the lens body is an interesting object, right? It's cylindrical, and it's got an opening on one side. And because of the way it's shaped, this should allow us to use this thing called a UV peeler to peel this thing apart. And so I'm going to go ahead and try that. So the first thing we need to do is go to Edges Mode. And we need to rotate around here. I'm going to double click, I'm going to use the Move tool or something. I'm going to double click. And again, if I say go display and do hidden line, you will see that it has selected all of those edges all the way around. So I have those edges selected. I'm going to come here to the UV peeler. I'm going to select that. And I know the UV peeler can work on an object when the line is green. And so since this is going to work, what I can do is I can come down here and I can click Apply. And I can wonder what just happened. Why did that not work? Maybe I can say, why did you not work? Oh, there we go. I don't know what happened, but I clicked Apply once, it spazzed. I clicked Apply a second time, and it applied it. And so what it's done is it's totally unwrapped this. And now there's a question as to how do we want to work with this? So do we want these little polygons to be more even in size and fill this uniformly? Or do we want these diagonal edges which are going to result in distortions? And so if I go to Garage Shading again, you can kind of see the distortions that are happening, right? There's some weird scaling things. It's being stretched all the way around this object in a weird way. And so let's go ahead and start to manipulate our U uniformity and V uniformity. If I stretch out this U uniformity, what I'm going to get is a much, much, much more even mesh. And then the other question is, do I want to adjust the V uniformity, right? Do I want these do I want there to be an even surface on all of this, or do I want it to be more compressed in certain areas? In our case, we probably want this to be even all the way across, just to make our life easier when we go to manipulate this. Now, you'll see that, some of these UVs are kind of smashed in between these polygons, and that might not be the best option, right? So let's see if we pull this V uniformity back out, right? This may be a much better option. And you really just have to probably experiment and see, but I think that this looks better and would be a lot easier to work with than the other way around. So I'm going to leave it set like this. You can also choose to compress it so it's not quite as big on the full material, but in our case, we're going to leave it set to the full material size. Okay, so this one is done. The peeler is really nice for very special case uses. And so let's go ahead and go on to the body. Now the body is significantly more complex. And so what I think we should do is I should stop. We should save our work for sure at this point. And then we should do the body as the next part. So I'm going to take a break, and I might come back right now.